the class itself is very interactive because you're passing around the dried herbs, you're passing around the teas and the teacups, and
Hello and welcome back to the Herbal Skillshare Marathon. In this session, we are going to be hearing from Jenn Demers, who is going to be sharing about the skills that she has developed to run intuitive herbal tea blending workshops. She talks about the entire process that she goes through to run these workshops, including what she brings to the event, how she organizes the events, the timeline throughout the actual workshop, and types of strategies that she puts into practice to keep people engaged and involved in the workshop every step of the way. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Jenn, to share this skill set with everyone at the marathon.
So today I'm going to talk about the intuitive tea blending workshop that I've been running for clients and for community members, and they've really enjoyed it. And I call it intuitive tea blending because I firmly believe that we're all drawn to the plant medicine that we need. So if you have somebody who walked into an apothecary and had 50 jars on the shelf, I truly believe that they're going to pick a few that are they need at that time, whether it's emotionally, intuitively, or physically. So I've had a lot of fun. I've built a workshop all around that. It definitely takes a while to set up. So my first tip is when you go to a location, make sure that you have an hour just for setup time. That is really critical because you don't want to be rushed. You have to make tea because the way I do it basically is I want everybody to have the sensory experience of all their senses. So taste, smell, touch. I want them to feel everything about the actual herbs. So I have dried herbs that they can actually use to kind of get a sense of what it looks like, what it feels like, what it smells like. I also make the tea too for each of the herbs that I'm actually going to talk about. So from a timing perspective, think about if you have maybe 4 or 5 people in your workshop and you have, say, 8 herbs plus a blend that you're going to have them try and you're going to go through the whole process, it's going to take a couple hours. So use that as your benchmark and say, if you want it to be shorter, maybe just cover 4 or 5 herbs. But I feel like the first thing I want to talk about is materials and what you should definitely have with you when you execute this actual workshop. So again, dried herbs, if you have the plant or if you have the fresh herbs, I would absolutely go with that. Bring it all in. The more they can experience for the plant, the better, because a lot of times people who come to my workshops don't really know a whole lot about herbalism, or they're new, or they're just curious about it. And even if they do know, they don't necessarily know the dried versus the fresh. So definitely bring as much material as you can. Another thing, get yourself some ramekins. You want a ramekin for every herb that you have. You can have fun with it. I love seashells, so I kind of got these, but you can go to a thrift shop or a yard sale, anything that you can use that you can put the dried herbs in, see? And then obviously a spoon. You want to make sure you don't cross-contaminate anything and make sure you have herbs that are for this specific workshop. So you don't want to, any herbs that you make medicine with that you're going to use for clients, don't use those for the workshop. Just make sure you have just separate herbs so that you're not cross-contaminating anything. So making sure you have the right tools like the ramekin and the spoon, very helpful. Also, I use these 32-ounce mason jars. Even if I only have a few people, I always fill to the top because I'll explain a little bit more later, but they're going to try all this tea. I got these little lids from Amazon. I love these things. They're so fun. And they're not that expensive, and you can reuse them all the time and over and over and over again. So it's worth the investment. And it just makes it so much easier to pour into the little cups. Okay, so I got these cute little tiny cups that I just love. And the funny thing is that when people walk into the workshop, I have an information packet that's going to go over all the herbs that I'm going to talk about, which is why I bring a pen, because everybody takes copious amounts of notes. But they have the packet in front of them and the little teacup, and they always get lots of comments like, oh, these are so cute. And it just adds to the experience. And I usually have a sachet of lavender or something at their place setting too. But again, I got these on Amazon, but you can get them anywhere. You can get them at a thrift shop. They don't have to match. They can be yard sale. The idea though is to have just a taste test. You don't want a big mug because they're gonna be trying a lot of tea. So this is just sufficient. You wanna make it kind of small. So making sure you have that available is super helpful. Tea bags that you can actually have them carry tea out, because in my workshops at the end they get to blend their own tea, and so they get to take an ounce and a quarter or so home with them. So you want to make sure you have this on hand. And also I sell my bulk herbs at the workshop. So you need something again for them to transport with. So make sure you have something like this. It doesn't have to be this fancy. You can have, a paper bag or whatever you want to use, but just make sure you have something to use like that. Also, critical food scales. One thing that ends up being a super, interesting point of conversation is the fact that not every herb weighs the same. People are really interested, especially when they're putting their own teas together. I'll go into this a little bit more, but I'll kind of give them a ramekin and a scale, and they'll be like, "Oh wow, I didn't realize that an ounce and a half looked like that. I didn't realize that dried orange peel or whatever, or dried ginger weighs so much versus rose petals or chamomile." Or that peppermint weighs different than hibiscus. It's really fun to have that conversation. So having the scale really helps to put it in perspective. Plus, they're gonna kind of be blending an ounce, ounce and a quarter anyway, so they're gonna have to weigh it out. It's good practice for them. The other thing that is super helpful: electric teapot. Especially if you're actually going to be transporting and bringing all this stuff to a location and you don't know if they have a stove, a tea kettle. You don't want to be messing around with too much of that stuff. Especially if you only have an hour to get ready. This will heat up water in 2 or 3 minutes. So I find it really helpful. I do have to actually fill it up a few times because I do have a lot of these jars. But the electric teapot, again, is something that you maybe spend $30 or $40 on, but you're going to use it over and over again. So again, it's an investment. If you really think you're going to want to do these tea workshops or any kind of workshops that involve tea, it's definitely worth the investment. So those are kind of the overall materials you want to make sure you have with you. Obviously, it's a lot to bring with you. It's more, it's a little easier if people are going to come to you, to your shop, to your home. But I actually find that people love having tea parties at their house. So I have my totes and I put it all in there and I bring it, with me. And that's actually gone over really well. And the whole concept of intuitive tea blending and being gravitated towards what you, intuitively are interested in, it kind of takes a lot of the fear off of how do you blend a tea. So I thought now I could go into a little bit of how I actually execute the workshop. So when they all come in, like I said, they have the place setting of their own packet and their little teacup and their pen and a little lavender sachet. It just sets the mood. And the herbs that you're going to choose are whatever you want to bring in. So if somebody wants to have a workshop that's focused on digestion, or focused on just a variety of herbs, or anxiety, or reproductive system, or whatever it is, kind of gear your herbs towards that. I tend to have more of an introductory of a range of herbs, and I have focused too on stress management and anxiety. So I like bringing the lavender as a sachet because it sort of sets that tone. And then I always have these lined up with the dried herbs and the ramekins on a counter, and it's just one long counter of teas, which is super fun. And it just keeps everything organized. And then what I do is I'll pass around the dried herb, okay, and the actual tea. And they'll put the tea, in their little cup so that they can actually taste it. They serve themselves the tea. And then at the same time, they're kind of observing the dried or the fresh herb, whatever you decide to bring in. And as they're doing that, I'm talking about the herb and the medicinal properties. I'm talking about the key constituents, the different elements of it, if it's used as a tincture or as a tea, if you use it as a capsule, maybe contraindications of what you might want to think about if you have, certain disabilities or disorders or other problems. But I'm talking about that as they're tasting the tea. And then once everybody has served themselves and had a chance to taste it, I just let them arrive for a few minutes and observe like how it makes them feel. And we start talking about it. Is it sweet? Is it dry? So is it astringent? Do they like it? Are they like repulsed by it? Like, oh, this is not my herb. And just have a conversation about that. And we do that with every single herb that I bring in. The other thing that I do is I always bring in a little crock pot. So that's another material if you want to do it this way, a crock pot of a tea blend that I make that we all can kind of try what a blend looks like. So I usually use my relaxing to calm tea, which is chamomile and rose petals and lemon balm. So they get to try what those all taste like together. It's just sort of like a bonus thing, and it gives me opportunity to talk about those herbs as well. So we kind of go through the whole process of all the different herbs that, they're tasting individually. And then I say, all right, you've got your little teacups, go and try blending. And they'll actually use the liquid tea and they'll put maybe a little bit of peppermint, a little bit of lemon balm, a little bit of hibiscus, and they can try the blend in the liquid tea. because a lot of times they'll be like, well, I don't know what it's going to taste like altogether. But this gives them a chance to practice before they actually decide what kind of dried blend they're going to put together and bring home. They like that part because they get to try different combinations. And again, it makes it fun. That's why I always have the 32-ounce mason jars, because you need a lot because we use a lot. And it just, you don't want to have to run out of stuff. So they spend probably 10 minutes just like trying different, combinations of teas. By this point, they're usually like smiling and giggling pretty happy because it's all stress management teas, which makes it kind of fun too. And then I give them each a ramekin. I usually have 3 of these food scales, and I give them each a ramekin, and they just kind of, use their spoon and they put whatever tea blend they want. I do go into, as part of the instruction, kind of a basic tea blend formula for what they might want to put the most of versus just a dab of and whatnot. But I end up just kind of giving them a ramekin to play with, and they weigh out their, ounce, ounce and a half. And that's where a lot of that conversation comes in about the weight of herbs and how you actually, if you're going to go to an apothecary, how you know how much to order, because they all weigh a little bit differently. But they have fun kind of blending their own. They get to take it home with them and try it, and they know they're going to like it because they already, tried it as an actual tea. I guess the only thing else I would say is, depending on the herbs that you bring with you, it's kind of fun sometimes after they've tried maybe 2 or 3 different teas around the table to say which ones go together, which, different herbs go together, which ones are more of the grassy kind of tasting, which are more floral, which are more astringent, and kind of help them put it into different categories so that they can start seeing how the teas might go together from a medicinal perspective or a flavor profile perspective. And it really makes it an interactive experience. And so far, they've really enjoyed it. I've had a lot of these workshops and people requesting them. And like I said, I'm surprised to hear that they actually want a tea party at their house. So I'll bring all my stuff to their place or whatnot. So it's just been fun. And that's kind of how I go about the process. And as I go, I tweak it. And based on the questions they ask or the comments they have or the feedback, I'll maybe tweak it for the next time. But definitely encourage you to have fun with it, keep it simple, get creative, and customize it to what would work for you. It's like a legit tea party at their house, and other friends come or their coworkers or whatnot, and we have a lot of fun. And they just, especially if they're on their own property, they're more relaxed too. Obviously, if you're going to rent a place, you make it as much comfortable as you can. But if they're sitting on the couch or people are sitting on the floor, we're all just sitting around, and we end up having really good discussions about well, again, I focus on anxiety. So people will kind of start to open up a little bit. And that's where I really feel like the magic happens. We start talking about experiences in real life, which is why I kind of get into the intuitive stuff, because people will say, yeah, I've been feeling this way. And I know when I try rose petals, I love them. I feel better versus not. And again, it's a little bit of coaching. It's a little bit of therapy. It's a little bit of just fun. And it's a little bit of having a night out for friends and family where they can just have fun. It's not all that expensive. I try to make it as reasonably priced as possible. So the information packet, this one is my herbs for stress and anxiety. And I like to include information about basically if they are the key constituents. So if it's an adaptogen, if it's a tonic, if it's a diuretic, antispasmodic, if it's for like mental clarity, like those kinds of general terms for the actual herb. And then preparation. So if this particular herb is good for a decoction or a tincture or a powder, putting into a capsule, how you can use it that way. And the parts used are critical. So the roots, the flowers, the leaves, or you just say aerial parts, however you want to explain that. That's again educational for them, because some people don't realize, you can just dig up the root. The root of the plant, you actually, dig in there and get at the root. And obviously we talk about the fact that when you do that, usually you kill the plant. So you have to kind of pay homage to the plant and respect it. And we talk about that too, is that whenever you use the plant, whenever you're going to take the leaves from it, when you're going to take the flowers, you want to thank it. I know it sounds funny to some people, but really it's giving you a gift. And we really want to respect that gift. So talking about the parts used allows me to kind of talk more about the plant itself and how it is a life force, and that it's giving us part of its life force. So it kind of ends up being a spiritual conversation too. I shoot for a 90-minute workshop. I feel like after that, people get a little antsy, and some people want to stay after and buy some bulk herbs. So that takes time. There's only one of me, so I can only do one at a time. So I really shoot for 90 minutes. So I've actually adjusted my workshop to really feature 6 individual herbs and then a blend of 3 so that I can still talk about them, but not individually necessarily. So I try to keep the actual instruction and discussion part to an hour. And then I have maybe 5 or 10 minutes of them, using their teacups with the actual teas and kind of going around and trying different combinations. And then I leave maybe 15 minutes or so for them to actually use the scale and the ramekins and kind of work with the herbs and create their actual blend. So that's sort of how I time it. Anyone who wants to stay later can definitely stay and chat with me. But then by that point, they're wrapped up, and those who are kind of on more of a time crunch can just leave, and we're not holding anybody up that way. The class itself is very interactive because you're passing around the dried herbs, you're passing around the teas and the teacups and everything. So that I think innately encourages engagement. But at the same time, after we talk about each plant and I talk about the different key constituents and the properties of the plant, I'll ask the question of, what do you think? How does it make you feel? What's your observation about it? And it might take a second for people to warm up to that conversation, but usually they'll say, my mouth is really dry. And that gives me an opportunity to talk about, the astringent properties of some of the plants. And some people will actually open up and talk about, wow, I really feel like in my history of anxiety, I've used chamomile and it's really become an ally for me. So it really just engages in conversation, but stopping after each herb and asking a couple of questions is very helpful. Usually by the end, like I said, we're kind of giggling and we're all like kind of just getting to know each other a little bit. I like conversation in general. That's just who I am. So I start to ask people more questions about their comments. And then when you start to really make it an interactive workshop and say, which herbs, based on what you've tried so far, which ones go together? And then it kind of forces them to say, I think I'd put the peppermint with the hibiscus, or I think I would put the chamomile with the rose, and it makes them think a little bit and respond. And they usually do it pretty freely because we're starting to have fun at that point. So I ask a lot of questions and stop, and taking that time to step back and allow them to respond has been critical. The whole idea of active listening, something that I've learned over time, especially in the last few years, is really taking that time to ask the question and then wait and allow them to think about it and respond back. So my first tip is do a run through the night before, just to kind of get an idea of timing. And especially if you talk fast or too slow, or if you need to cut an herb or 2 out, really recommend doing a run through because it'll just help you with the timing as well as know what to talk about when you're actually going through the presentation. That would be first. Second, it'd be invest in the equipment. Especially if you're going to be doing this regularly, you want to add this to your herbal business. It really does help to have the food scales and the electric teapots and whatnot. Have fun. Definitely have fun with it. People are going to feed off of your energy, right? So if you're having a great time, if you're doing what you love and you're passionate about it, they're going to feed off of that, and they're going to have fun too. And they're going to go home and hopefully be inspired to, have their tea, maybe work more with it, maybe contact you, maybe go to an apothecary and just kind of like pick a jar and see what they decide, and then go back home and look it up and see, what the properties are, because again, we're talking about the intuitive element here. So definitely have fun with it as you're going along. It does help to have the bulk herbs available from a business perspective, but also to encourage people to play around and have fun with it, and say, hey, you maybe brought home this one tea today, but grab a few other herbs. They're not that expensive, and you can kind of practice mixing and matching. I've had a lot of people do that and then call me the next day and be like, I just made this tea, and they're super excited about it. And again, my whole philosophy is just introducing people to herbalism and taking the fear factor out of it, and it has to be perfect factor out of it, and the intimidation factor, and saying like, no, you can really just have fun and see what you like. I have probably 100 jars of tea and different herbs in my apothecary. And every morning I literally go and say, what do I feel like today? Like, oh, maybe a little this, maybe a little anise hyssop, maybe some orange, maybe some rose petals, and I blend a different tea every day, because you can, and that's the flexibility that herbalism provides. So when you're doing it just for fun and for a wonderful tea, you can be flexible with that. Obviously, if you're doing it for medicinal properties, it's a little more structured. But I think the first step is just introducing people to herbalism and the herbs and how simple they can be to use.